Hello Orchid friends, welcome back to my channel. Wherever you are, I hope you're having a great day, staying healthy and staying safe. Today we have a classic white primary hybrid Phalaenopsis orchid. It's a cross between Aphrodite and Sanderiana, alba. I have had a very much love-hate relationship with this orchid, and I will tell you why. Every time it would give me very vigorous root growth, leaf growth, and then of course it would then in turn give me a flower spike. So I was having high hopes for it, but every single time it tends to underperform almost every single time. And that's why I tend to feel maybe this orchid is not for me. In the picture you can see the main or old flower spike was trying to put out a secondary spike, which was great, and then at the base it was also trying to put out a new flower spike, so that was really good. I was really happy that it was doing that. But at some point I realized that this orchid was simply just not really doing how it's supposed to be. So coming up in a few seconds you'll see what I mean. Essentially, well, the first flower spike, secondary flower spike on the old spike just never continued to grow. And then I started to see this orchid having bud blast issues. And I can tell you, I know how to avoid bud blast. And at the same time, when this orchid was developing buds, I have many other orchids that were also developing buds, and none of them had any bud blast issues but this one. So the only conclusion that I can draw from this is really the overall general care that I give to my orchids and the overall conditions that my other orchids receive is okay for those orchids, but not this particular one. And sometimes that's you may run into a situation like this, that you have a lot of orchids, but certain orchids just aren't really performing as well as other orchids because their needs or the kind of environment or special care that they need just simply aren't being met. And if that happens, you do have a couple of things you could do to try to keep this orchid and help this orchid do better. For me, for this orchid, number one, I would definitely have to think about try to adjust the fertilizer concentration, or maybe give it some additional fertilizer to give it some vigor. And then number two is maybe I'll have to change the way this orchid is grown. For example, right now it's in a moss medium, and it's in a container, a cup. I think it's a 16-ounce cup without drainage hole, so it's a moss no hole method. Maybe I'll have to change it to inorganic media with holes at the bottom maybe. So those are the kinds of things that I'm thinking that I may have to do differently with this orchid, just to see if next time around it would have the same issue. Because I can tell you, I did not move this orchid at all, so it was not because of the movement, the disturbance. And then for my other orchids, the fact that they didn't have any bud blast tells me that the temperature, the humidity, these two factors were stable. So the only thing that I can kind of guess is that this orchid somehow it wasn't happy, and it could be because of potential root issues in the media, but I don't know. So that's also something I'll have to figure out or find out after this orchid's bloom is finished, and then I'll kind of do a clean up and then take it out just to see what went on there in the root in the container. So essentially, after that first initial bloom, which is lovely, it's traditional white, classic white, but then because it has Aphrodite and Sanderiana, so the shape of the flower, it looks almost like a star, which I love. But then the mid section of the spike, you can tell at least 4 buds blasted, and I can tell you the buds toward the end of the spike also did not make it. So for some reason that this orchid was just not in the right condition to bloom. Even though the leaves are doing fine, there's no signs of dehydration, and the new leaf is also shiny and growing strong, and the root system looked okay to me. And I was even trying to see if there was any pest infestation issues, whatnot. Nothing. So I'm still quite puzzled about the reason why this orchid just were simply just blasting its buds for, whatever reason. It's puzzling to me. But in the end, I decided just to cut the flower spike off because these flower spikes are so skinny anyways. So, to my surprise, it started shortly after I cut off the flower spike. Might have been like 2 weeks later. It started to pull out another spike. So that was really surprising. But I still cannot manage to find the subsequent video on that. On the new spike. So here is a video clip from before, from its initial bloom, the only bloom, just to kind of give you a sense, a little bit more footage to give you a sense of how it looked at that time. This orchid cross does not have any fragrance at all, and that is kind of a disadvantage for this orchid, because I thought sanderiana would have a slight fragrance. So I was hoping that this orchid would be slightly fragrant, somewhat fragrant, but it was not the case. Now, the no-hole moss method is kind of fun, and the way I water this orchid is really just give it a set amount of water. And usually I go between 1/8 of a cup to 1/4 cup of water, depending on the season and depending on my environment's humidity. But this is a really fun method, especially if you are trying to encourage your orchid to grow more roots. And now that this orchid is having enough roots, and because it's struggling to mature its buds to give me more bloom, I'm thinking I really have to decide if I want to change the growing method. I'm thinking maybe semi-hydro, maybe it's my typical inorganic media in traditional setup with holes at the bottom, but then double cup it so that way I can go between traditional setup or semi-hydro setup depending on what I see with the orchid or with the temperature and humidity. So these are the kinds of things I'm thinking about doing differently with this orchid. And hopefully next time around it would do better, because it gave me a lovely long spike with lots of buds, but only one flower made it, and it was its first, and then subsequent buds just simply blasted. So we'll see. I'll keep you posted. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!